The wind that morning could strip skin from bone. Caleb Rourke had been tracking a lame mare for 3 days through country that didn't forgive mistakes. The snow came horizontal across the ridge, turning the world white and mean. He'd found the mare an hour past dawn, standing in a ravine with a shattered foreleg, and he'd done what needed doing. The gunshot still echoed in his ears as he led his gelding back toward the timberline. That's when he saw the red. Not much of it, just a slash of color against white that didn't belong. Too bright, too wrong. Could have been a scrap of cloth blown off a wagon train. Could have been nothing. But Caleb had survived 11 winters out here by paying attention to things that didn't fit, so he turned the gelding and rode toward it. The red became fabric. The fabric became a dress. The dress had a body in it. Christ. The woman lay face down in a drift, one arm flung out like she'd been reaching for something that wasn't there. The dress had probably cost more than Caleb made in a year, some kind of silk thing, deep crimson, now shredded and frozen stiff. Her dark hair spread across the snow in a tangle. He couldn't tell if she was breathing. Caleb swung down and dropped to one knee beside her. His first thought was that she was dead. His second thought was that she was too well dressed to be out here alone. His third thought was that someone had probably put her here on purpose. He pressed 2 fingers against her throat. The pulse was there, faint and slow, but there. Her skin felt like ice. "Can you hear me?" Nothing. He looked around. The ridge stretched empty in all directions, just snow and rock and skeletal pine. No tracks except his own. No sign of a horse, a wagon, another person. The nearest town was 15 miles south, and the trail that led there was buried under 3 feet of fresh powder. She groaned, barely audible. "All right," Caleb said, to her or to himself or to the empty sky. "All right." He got his arms under her and lifted. She weighed almost nothing. The dress crackled as he moved her, ice breaking in the folds. He could see her face now, young, maybe 25, with sharp features and skin that would have been olive-toned before the cold leached the color out. There was a bruise along her jaw, dark and fresh. Her lips had gone blue. The gelding snorted and tossed his head as Caleb approached with the woman in his arms. "I know," Caleb muttered. "I don't like it either." Getting her onto the horse took some doing. She was dead weight, and the gelding kept dancing sideways, spooked by the smell of blood or just the strangeness of it. Caleb finally got her positioned across the saddle, stomach down, head hanging on one side and legs on the other. Not dignified, but it'd keep her from sliding off. He swung up behind her and gathered the reins. The ride back to the cabin took 2 hours. The woman didn't wake, didn't make a sound except for shallow, rasping breaths that Caleb could hear even over the wind. He kept one hand on her back to hold her steady. His mind turned over possibilities. Rich woman, out here alone, dressed for a ballroom, didn't make sense. Could be she'd run from something. Could be she'd been thrown from a carriage. Could be someone had beaten her and left her to freeze. That bruise on her jaw looked like knuckles. Not your problem, Caleb told himself. Get her warm, get her breathing right, send her on her way. But even as he thought it, he knew it wasn't that simple. Nothing ever was. The cabin sat in a clearing backed up against a granite cliff, positioned so the rock face took the worst of the north wind. Caleb had built it himself 7 years ago, after he'd left. He cut that thought off. Old history, dead history. He got the gelding into the lean-to beside the cabin, then carried the woman inside. The fire in the stove had burned down to coals. He kicked the door shut with his heel and laid her on his bunk, the only piece of real furniture in the place. She looked smaller now, fragile in a way that made him uneasy. He wasn't good with fragile things. First thing, get her out of the wet clothes. The dress was frozen to her skin in places, and he had to work carefully to peel it away. Underneath, she wore a corset and layers of silk that would have been useless even in mild weather. Whoever had dressed her hadn't dressed her for survival. He wrapped her in both of his wool blankets and his spare coat, then built up the fire until the stove roared and the cabin started to warm. Her breathing didn't change. Still shallow, still labored. Caleb filled a pot with snow and set it on the stove to melt. While he waited, he examined the dress. Good fabric, hand-stitched seams, the kind of detail that spoke to money and taste. There were tears along the back and sleeves, not from catching on branches, but clean rips, like someone had grabbed her and she'd pulled away. He found a dark stain near the hem that could have been blood or wine, or something else entirely. No jewelry, no rings, no necklace, Nothing. Either she hadn't been wearing any or someone had taken it. The water heated. Caleb soaked a cloth and cleaned the blood from her face and hands. Most of it came from scrapes and small cuts, nothing deep. The bruise on her jaw looked worse up close. Definitely knuckles. Probably a man's. She didn't wake. He sat in his chair, a split log thing he'd made in his second winter, and watched her breathe. The wind howled outside. Snow hissed against the shutters. The fire crackled. Inside, the cabin felt too warm, too small, too full of someone else. An hour passed. Then 2. Around midday she stirred, a small movement, just her fingers curling in the blanket. Then her eyes opened. They were dark. Brown, maybe, or gray, hard to tell in the firelight. They stared at the ceiling for a long moment, unfocused, before sliding toward him. "Where?" Her voice cracked. She tried again. "Where am I?" "My cabin," Caleb said. 15 miles north of Greaves Bend. Found you in the snow on the north ridge." She blinked slowly, processing. Her gaze moved around the cabin, the rough walls, the small window, the stove, the table with his tin cup and plate. Then back to him. "You carried me." "Seemed like the thing to do." "How long?" "Few hours. It's past noon now." She tried to sit up and immediately swayed. Caleb half rose from his chair, but she held up a hand, steadying herself against the wall. The blankets slipped, and she grabbed for them, holding them tight around her shoulders. She was wearing his spare shirt. He'd put it on her after stripping off the dress, and it hung on her like a tent. "Take it slow," Caleb said. "You were half frozen when I found you." "I need—" She closed her eyes, breathing carefully. "Water, please." He poured a cup from the pot on the stove and handed it to her. She drank like someone who'd been lost in the desert, barely pausing for breath. When she finished, she lowered the cup and looked at him again. "Thank you," she said. "You remember what happened?" A pause. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite fear, not quite calculation, but something in between. "I was traveling," she said. "There was an accident. The carriage overturned." "Where's the carriage now?" "I don't know. I walked. I must have gotten turned around." "You walked 15 miles in a silk dress in the middle of a blizzard." "I didn't know it was 15 miles. Caleb studied her. She met his gaze steadily, but there was a tightness around her eyes, a careful control in the way she held herself. She was lying. Not badly, but enough. "What's your name?" he asked. Another pause, shorter this time. "Eliza," she said. "Eliza Ward." "Where were you headed, Miss Ward?" "Greaves Bend. I have family there." "What family?" "That's my business." "Fair enough." Caleb leaned back in his chair. "You're welcome to stay until you're strong enough to travel. Storms should break in a day or two. After that, I'll take you into town. I can pay you." "I'm not asking you to." "I insist." She glanced around the cabin, and he saw the moment she realized she had nothing. No bag, no money, no possessions at all except the ruined dress. Her jaw tightened. "When I get to town, I'll make sure you're compensated." "Sure." She looked at him for a long moment, and he couldn't quite read what was in her eyes. Suspicion, maybe. Or just exhaustion. "What's your name?" she asked. "Caleb Rourke." "Mr. Rourke." She nodded like she was filing it away. "Thank you for not leaving me to die." Wouldn't have sat right. Most men would have done it anyway. He didn't have an answer for that, so he stood and moved to the stove. "You should eat something. I've got venison stew." "I'm not hungry." "You will be." He ladled stew into a bowl and handed it to her. She took it but didn't eat, just held it in both hands, staring down at the contents like she was working through a complicated problem. The silence stretched. "That bruise on your jaw," Caleb said. "Someone hit you." Her head came up sharply. "I told you, the carriage overturned." "Overturned carriages don't leave knuckle marks." "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know what a fist looks like." She set the bowl down on the bunk beside her, her movements precise and controlled. When she spoke again, her voice was colder. "You've been very kind, Mr. Rourke, but my past is not your concern." "It is if someone's looking for you." "No one is looking for me." "Then who hit you?" "That's none of your business." They stared at each other. The fire popped. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Caleb broke the silence first. All right, you don't want to talk? We won't talk. But if someone comes looking, I need to know what I'm dealing with. No one will come. You sure about that? She didn't answer, just picked up the bowl again and took a small sip of stew, her face unreadable. Caleb turned back to the stove and poured himself coffee. The rest of the day passed in uncomfortable quiet. She ate a little, drank more water, slept in fits and starts. He went out to check on the gelding and bring in more firewood. The storm showed no signs of breaking. By evening, she was strong enough to sit at the table. She still moved carefully, like everything hurt, but the color had come back to her face. She watched him cook, more stew, some cornbread, and didn't offer to help. You live out here alone? She asked. Yeah. How long? 10 years, give or take. That's a long time. It suits me. No wife? No family? No. She tilted her head slightly. You don't talk much. Not much to say. Or you're hiding from something. He glanced at her. Everyone's hiding from something, Miss Ward. She smiled at that. Just a small curve of her lips, but it changed her face entirely. For a moment, she didn't look guarded or afraid, just tired and maybe a little amused. That's true, she said. They ate in silence. The cornbread came out dry, but she didn't complain. When they finished, Caleb cleared the plates, and she moved back to the bunk. He threw another log on the fire and settled into his chair with his coffee. You can have the bed, he said. I'll sleep on the floor. That's not necessary? It's my cabin. I'll decide what's necessary. She didn't argue, just pulled the blankets up to her chin and closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out. Caleb sat awake for a long time, watching the fire burn down. He thought about the dress, the bruise, the careful way she answered questions. He thought about the fact that no one traveled through this country in winter unless they were running from something or running toward something desperate. He thought about the way she'd looked at him when he'd asked if someone was looking for her. No one will come, she'd said, but her eyes had said something different. No. The storm lasted 3 days. On the first day, Eliza mostly slept. Her body was still recovering, and Caleb let her be. He kept the fire going, cooked simple meals, and tried not to think too hard about the situation he'd walked into. On the second day, she started moving around the cabin. She was still weak, but she had the kind of determination that didn't let weakness stop her. She folded the blankets with sharp, precise movements. She organized the firewood by size. She even tried to help with dinner until Caleb told her to sit down. I'm not an invalid, she said. Didn't say you were, but you're still recovering, and I don't need help. Everyone needs help? Not me. She gave him a look that suggested she thought he was being stubborn and stupid, but she sat down anyway. She had a way of sitting that made the rough chair look like a throne, back straight, hands folded, chin up. It reminded Caleb of something he couldn't quite place. Where'd you learn to move like that? He asked. Like what? Like you're used to people watching you. Her expression shuddered. I don't know what you mean. Sure you do. She didn't answer, just looked away toward the window where snow piled against the glass. On the third day, she started asking questions. What do you do out here? She asked over breakfast. Whatever needs doing. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. She frowned. You're very difficult to talk to. You're very persistent. Is that a bad thing? Depends on what you're persisting about. She set down her spoon. I'm trying to understand who you are, Mr. Rourke. You saved my life. That makes you important to me, whether you like it or not. I'm not important. I'm just the man who found you. That's a strange distinction. It's an honest one. She studied him for a long moment, and he had the uncomfortable feeling that she was seeing more than he wanted her to. Then she picked up her spoon again and went back to eating. All right, she said. Keep your secrets. I'll keep mine. But she didn't. Not entirely. That afternoon, while Caleb was outside splitting wood, he heard her voice through the cabin wall. Singing. It was quiet, almost under her breath, but the melody was clear. Some kind of French song, complicated and elegant. When he came back inside, she stopped abruptly. Don't stop on my account, he said. I didn't realize I was singing. You've got a good voice. She looked embarrassed, which was the first time he'd seen her look anything close to vulnerable. My mother insisted I learn. She said it was important for a lady to have accomplishments. Your mother sounds like she had high standards. She did. A pause. She's dead now. I'm sorry. Eliza shook her head. It was a long time ago. But the way she said it, flat, practiced, told him it wasn't long enough. That night, the wind finally died. By morning, the sky had cleared to a hard, bright blue. Caleb went outside and surveyed the damage. The drifts came up to his waist in places, and the lean-to had taken a beating, but the cabin had held. The gelding was restless but unharmed. When he came back inside, Eliza was standing by the window, looking out at the snow. It's beautiful, she said. It's deadly. Both can be true. She turned to face him, and he noticed she'd braided her hair. It changed her appearance, made her look younger, less guarded. She was still wearing his spare shirt and an old pair of his trousers, rolled up and cinched with rope, and the whole ensemble should have looked ridiculous. Instead, she wore it like it had been tailored for her. The storm's over, Caleb said. Road'll still be tough, but we can probably make Greaves Bend by tomorrow if we start early. Tomorrow, she repeated. That a problem? No, She looked back out the window. I'm not sure what I'm going to find when I get there. Thought you said you had family. I do, I think. She wrapped her arms around herself. It's complicated. Most things are. She smiled faintly. You're not going to ask, are you? Would you tell me if I did? Probably not. Then there's no point asking. She turned back to him, and there was something different in her expression now. Something softer, less defended. You're a strange man, Mr. Rourke. Been called worse. I didn't mean it as an insult. I know. They stood there for a moment, the silence between them less uncomfortable than it had been. Then Caleb cleared his throat and moved toward the stove. We should eat, he said. Long ride tomorrow. Mr. Rourke? He paused. Thank you, she said. For everything. For not asking questions I don't want to answer. For not assuming things. Like I said, wouldn't have sat right leaving you there. It's more than that. You could have put me on the horse and taken me straight to town. You didn't. You let me recover. You gave me space. She hesitated. Most men wouldn't have. Caleb didn't know what to say to that. He settled for a nod and went back to making breakfast. But her words stayed with him. Most men wouldn't have. The question was, what kind of men had she known? Bis. They left at dawn the next morning. Caleb packed light. Some dried meat, coffee, a canteen. Eliza had nothing to pack. She wore the clothes he'd given her, and a spare coat that hung almost to her knees. He'd found her a pair of his old boots, stuffed with cloth to make them fit. She looked like a child playing dress-up. She looked like someone trying very hard not to look afraid. The ride to Greaves Bend was slow going. The trail was buried under snow, and the gelding had to pick his way carefully through the drifts. Caleb walked alongside, leading the horse, while Eliza rode. She didn't complain, didn't ask to stop, just held on and kept her eyes forward. Around midday, they stopped to rest. Caleb built a small fire and melted snow for water. Eliza sat on a fallen log, her hands tucked into the coat sleeves for warmth. How far? She asked. Another 6 hours, maybe less if the trail clears. She nodded but didn't look relieved. You nervous? Caleb asked. A little. About the family or something else? She glanced at him. You're doing it again. What? Not asking, but asking anyway. Old habit. Were you a lawman? The question caught him off guard. What makes you say that? You notice things. The way you looked at my bruise, the way you watched the trail. You're always paying attention, like you're expecting trouble. Out here you should always expect trouble. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. She smiled, just a little. Fair enough. They finished their water and got back on the trail. The afternoon wore on. The sun started to sink toward the horizon, turning the snow gold and then pink. Caleb kept watch, for tracks, for movement, for anything that felt wrong, but the land stayed empty. Just before sunset, they crested a rise and saw Greaves Bend below. It wasn't much of a town, a main street with maybe a dozen buildings, a church at one end, a saloon at the other. Wood smoke rose from chimneys, lamplight glowed in windows. It looked warm, It looked safe. It looked like a lie. Caleb felt Eliza tense in the saddle. He glanced up at her. "Second thoughts?" he asked. "No?" But her voice was tight. "Just trying to remember what I'm supposed to say. The truth usually works. The truth isn't always safe." Before he could respond, she urged the gelding forward, starting down the slope toward town. Caleb followed, his hand resting instinctively on the knife at his belt. They reached the main street as full dark set in. A few people were still out, a man closing up the general store, a woman herding children inside, a group of miners heading toward the saloon. They all stopped and stared as Caleb and Eliza rode past. Small towns. Everyone noticed strangers. "Where to?" Caleb asked. "The hotel, I suppose." "You have money for a room?" She hesitated. "No, but I can work something out." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I'm getting," she said, echoing his words back at him with a faint smile. They stopped in front of the Greaves Bend Hotel, a 2-story building that had seen better days but still had glass in most of its windows. Caleb helped Eliza down from the saddle. She stood for a moment, looking up at the building like it was a gallows. "You don't have to go in," Caleb said quietly. "Yes, I do. If you're in trouble." "I'm not your responsibility, Mr. Rourke." She turned to face him. "You've done more than enough. More than I had any right to ask." "I didn't do it because you asked." "I know." She reached out like she might touch his arm, then seemed to think better of it. Her hand dropped. "Goodbye, Caleb." It was the first time she'd used his given name. It sounded strange in her voice, intimate, final. "Goodbye, Miss Ward." She turned and walked toward the hotel. He watched her climb the steps, push open the door, disappear inside. The door swung shut behind her. Caleb stood there for a long moment, the gelding's reins in his hand, snow crunching under his boots. Every instinct told him to leave. Get on the horse, ride back to the cabin, forget this ever happened. But he didn't move, because he'd seen the way she'd looked at the hotel, the way her shoulders had tightened, the way her hand had shaken when she reached for the door. And because, despite everything she'd said, he didn't believe her story. Not the carriage accident, not the family in town, not the calm way she'd said goodbye like she wasn't walking into something dangerous. He believed the bruise on her jaw. He believed the fear in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. He believed that someone, somewhere, had hurt her badly enough that she'd rather freeze to death in a blizzard than face them again. And that was the problem. Because Caleb Rourke had spent 10 years in this wilderness telling himself he didn't care about other people's problems. 10 years keeping his head down and his past buried. 10 years building a life where the only person he had to worry about was himself. But now there was a woman in a hotel, with no money, no possessions, and a secret she'd die before telling. A woman who'd said goodbye like she didn't expect to see him again. A woman who, for reasons he couldn't explain and didn't want to examine, he couldn't walk away from. "Damn," Caleb muttered. He tied the gelding to the hitching post and followed her inside. The hotel lobby smelled like old tobacco and desperation. A single oil lamp burned on the front desk, casting long shadows across walls that hadn't seen fresh paint in years. Behind the desk sat a man with thinning hair and the suspicious eyes of someone who'd learned not to trust strangers with empty pockets. Eliza stood in the middle of the room, her borrowed coat dripping snowmelt onto the warped floorboards. She looked small in the dim light, her hands tucked into her sleeves. The desk clerk looked her up and down. "Help you?" "I need a room." $2 a night, in advance." "I don't have any money with me right now, but then I can't help you." The clerk turned back to his ledger, dismissing her. Caleb stepped through the door, letting it bang shut behind him. The clerk's head snapped up. Eliza turned, her eyes going wide. "Mr. Rourke, she'll take the room," Caleb said, pulling coins from his pocket and dropping them on the desk. 3 nights. The clerk scooped up the money and pushed a key across the scarred wood. "Room 4. Up the stairs, last door on the left." Eliza stared at Caleb. "You don't have to—" "We already had this conversation." He picked up the key and handed it to her. "You need a place to stay. I had the money." "I'll pay you back?" "Sure." Her jaw tightened. For a moment he thought she might argue, might throw the key back at him and walk out into the snow on principle. But she didn't. She just closed her fingers around the brass key and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said quietly. You eaten? Not since this morning. There's a place across the street. Come on. The restaurant, if you could call it that, was attached to the saloon, separated by a thin wall that did nothing to block the sound of drinking and gambling on the other side. They sat at a corner table, and a tired-looking woman brought them plates of beef and potatoes that were better than Caleb's cooking, but not by much. Eliza ate slowly, her eyes tracking the other people in the room. There weren't many, a couple of miners, a man in a suit who looked like a traveling salesman, an old woman eating alone by the window. Nobody paid them much attention. You said you had family here, Caleb said. Eliza cut a piece of beef, not meeting his eyes. I might have exaggerated that. Might have. All right, I don't have family here. I don't know anyone here. So why come? Because it's far from where I was. Caleb set down his fork. Who are you running from? She looked up then, and there was something raw in her expression, fear mixed with anger mixed with exhaustion. Does it matter? It does if they're going to come looking. They won't. They think I'm dead. The words hung in the air between them. The noise from the saloon seemed to get louder, filling the silence. The carriage accident, Caleb said slowly. That part was true? In a manner of speaking, she pushed food around her plate. The carriage went into a river. I was supposed to be inside. But you weren't. I jumped before it went over, grabbed onto a tree branch. The current took the carriage downstream. By the time anyone could get to it, she paused. There was a body inside, my maid. She'd been sleeping when it happened. She never woke up. Caleb felt something cold settle in his chest. Someone drove that carriage into the river on purpose.
Yes. Why? Because I was worth more dead than alive. She finally looked at him. Or so they thought. Who's they? She shook her head. It doesn't matter. I'm supposed to be dead. That makes me safe. Unless someone recognizes you. No one will. I've never been this far west, and even if they did, she touched her face, her hair. I don't look like I used to. That was probably true. The bruise had faded to yellow-green, but it changed the shape of her face. The rough clothes, the pulled-back hair, the exhaustion in her eyes, she looked nothing like someone worth killing. She looked like 100 other women scraping by in frontier towns. What's your real name? Caleb asked. I told you, Eliza Ward. That's the name you gave me? I'm asking for the real one. She met his gaze steadily. If I tell you, you become part of this. Right now, you're just a man who helped a stranger. You can walk away. But if I tell you who I really am, what I'm really running from, she shook her head. I won't do that to you. Little late for that. No, it's not. You can still leave. Go back to your cabin. Forget you ever found me. And if I don't want to forget? The question came out rougher than he'd meant it to. Eliza's eyes widened slightly, and he saw something shift in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper. Why wouldn't you? She asked softly. Caleb didn't have a good answer for that. He barely understood it himself. He'd spent a decade avoiding this exact situation, getting tangled up in someone else's trouble, caring what happened to a person he barely knew. But here he was, paying for her room, buying her dinner, asking questions he had no right to ask. Don't know, he said finally. But I don't. She studied him for a long moment. Then she picked up her fork and went back to eating. You're a stubborn man, Mr. Rourke. Been told that before. They finished the meal in silence. When they were done, Caleb paid and they walked back across the street to the hotel. The temperature had dropped and their breath came out in white clouds. The main street was empty now, everyone driven inside by the cold. At the hotel door, Eliza paused. Will you stay in town tonight? Planning on it. Need to get supplies anyway. Where will you sleep? Stable, probably. Won't be the first time. She frowned. That's ridiculous. I have a room with a bed. You paid for it. You should use it. You need it more than I do. We can share. The words hung between them. Caleb raised an eyebrow. I didn't mean... She flushed. I meant you could take the floor, or we could take turns with the bed. It's freezing, and the stable isn't heated, and you've already done so much. I'll be fine. You're being stubborn again, and you're being impractical. We barely know each other. You've seen me in my underclothes. I think we're past propriety. She had a point, but Caleb shook his head anyway. Get some rest, Miss Ward.
I'll come by in the morning before I head back." She looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't, just nodded and turned toward the door. Then she stopped and looked back. "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "Be careful." "Of what?" "I don't know, just be careful." She went inside before he could respond. Caleb stood in the street for a moment, watching the window of room 4 until a light appeared behind the curtain. Then he turned and headed for the stable. The stable keeper was an old man with rheumatism who was happy to let Caleb sleep in the loft for 50 cents. Caleb settled into the hay, his coat pulled tight, and tried to sleep. But his mind kept turning over everything Eliza had said and everything she hadn't. A carriage in a river. A body that wasn't hers. Someone who thought she was worth more dead than alive. And the biggest question, who was she before she became Eliza Ward? He was still awake when he heard voices below. 2 men talking in low tones. Caleb went still, listening. Saw them come in together. Woman and a man, both looking rough. Doesn't mean anything. Lots of people look rough this time of year. This woman had dark hair, about the right age. You think every dark-haired woman is her? We've been chasing shadows for 2 weeks. The boss said to check everything. You want to explain to him why we didn't? A pause, then, fine. We'll ask around tomorrow. But I'm telling you, she's dead. Nobody survives that river in winter. Maybe. But we don't get paid until we're sure. The voices moved away. Caleb lay motionless in the hay, his heart beating steady and hard. He waited until he heard the stable door close, then climbed down from the loft as quietly as he could. The street was dark and empty. He moved through shadows until he reached the hotel, then slipped inside. The desk clerk had nodded off in his chair, snoring softly. Caleb took the stairs 2 at a time and knocked on the door of room 4. "Miss Ward, it's Caleb. Open the door." Movement inside. The door opened a crack, and Eliza looked out, her hair loose around her shoulders. She was still wearing his shirt. "What's wrong?" "Get your things. We're leaving." "What? Why?" "Because there are men looking for a dark-haired woman, and they're going to start asking questions in the morning." Her face went pale. "How do you know?" "Heard them talking in the stable. They mentioned a boss, mentioned checking to see if you were dead." He kept his voice low. "They're not sure it's you, but they will be if you're still here tomorrow." She stepped back, pressing a hand to her mouth. No, they can't. I was so careful." "Doesn't matter now. We need to move." "Where will we go?" "My cabin. It's isolated. They won't find you there." "I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm telling you, get dressed. Bring anything you can carry. We leave in 5 minutes." He didn't wait for her to agree, just turned and headed back down the stairs. The clerk was still sleeping. Caleb moved past him and out into the street, then jogged toward the stable. He saddled the gelding quickly, his hands working from muscle memory, then led the horse out the back way. When he returned to the hotel, Eliza was waiting by the door. She'd put on the borrowed coat and boots, but that was all she had. No bag, no belongings. She looked terrified. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. They moved fast and quiet through the dark streets, staying off the main road. Caleb didn't breathe easy until they were past the last building and climbing back into the hills. The moon was bright enough to see by, turning the snow blue-white. Neither of them spoke. Eliza held on to him as they rode, her face pressed against his back. He could feel her shaking, from cold or fear or both. They rode for 2 hours before Caleb stopped to rest the horse. They were deep in the timber now, surrounded by pine and silence. He helped Eliza down, and she immediately sank onto a fallen log. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" "For bringing this to your door, for making you run in the middle of the night, for—" Her voice cracked. "For all of it." Caleb crouched beside her. "You didn't make me do anything. I chose this." "Why? You don't even know me." "I know enough." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have right now." She looked at him, and in the moonlight her eyes were dark and lost. "They're going to keep looking. Even if they don't find me in Greaves Bend, they'll keep looking." "Let them look. The frontier's a big place." "You don't understand. The man who wants me dead—" She stopped, like the words were physically painful. "He doesn't give up, ever. If he thinks there's even a chance I'm alive, he'll send more men, better men." "Then we make sure he doesn't think that." "How?" Caleb stood and looked back the way they'd come. The trail was dark, empty. We make them believe what they want to believe. That you died in that river. That the woman in Greaves Bend was just someone who looked like you. And how do we do that? By disappearing. By making sure no one sees you, no one hears about you. By keeping you hidden until they give up and go home. She laughed, but it was a brittle sound. You're talking about me living in your cabin. For how long? Weeks? Months?
As long as it takes. That's insane. You have a better idea? She didn't. They both knew it.
Caleb pulled her to her feet. Come on, we've got another hour before we're home.
Home,
she repeated softly. That's a strange word for it. But she let him help her back onto the horse, and they rode on through the frozen night. They reached the cabin just before dawn. The sky was turning gray at the edges, and Caleb's arms ached from holding the gelding steady over rough terrain. Eliza had stopped shaking somewhere around midnight, but she hadn't said a word since. He got her inside and built up the fire while she stood in the middle of the room, looking around like she was seeing it for the first time. This is it, she said. This is where I'm supposed to hide. It's not so bad. It's one room.
It's warm. It's dry. And no one knows about it except me. She turned to face him. I can't do this. I can't spend months trapped in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. You don't have a choice. There's always a choice.
Not this time. He moved toward her, and she took a step back. He stopped. Listen to me. Those men in town, they're professionals. They're not going to stop because it's cold or because the trail went dead. They're going to keep looking until someone tells them to stop. And the only way that happens is if they're sure you're dead. So I'm supposed to be dead. For how long? Until it's safe. And when will that be? He didn't have an answer for that. They stared at each other, and he could see the panic building in her eyes, the desperation of someone who'd run out of options. I'm not your prisoner, she said. Never said you were? Then I can leave whenever I want. You can try. That sounds like a threat. It's a fact. You try to leave now, in winter, with no supplies and no idea where you're going, you'll freeze to death before you make it 10 miles. Better than being caged. Is it? The question stopped her. She opened her mouth, closed it, then turned away and pressed her palms against the table. Her shoulders were rigid. I can't do this, she whispered. Caleb moved to the stove and poured coffee, then held out a cup to her. She didn't take it. He set it on the table. You said someone wanted you dead, he said. You said he doesn't give up. That means he's powerful. Rich, probably. Connected. She didn't respond. You're not some nobody running from a bad husband or a debt collector. You're someone important, someone whose death would matter to the right people. He paused. So who are you really? For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she turned and looked at him, and her face was stripped of all pretense. My name is Eliza Harrington, she said. My father was Jonathan Harrington. Maybe you've heard of him. Caleb had. Everyone had. Jonathan Harrington had been one of the wealthiest men in the country. Railroads, mining, shipping. He'd died 5 years ago, and the papers had been full of it. You're his daughter. His only child, which means when he died, everything went to me. She laughed bitterly. A fortune so big it takes 6 lawyers just to keep track of it. Properties in 4 states. Mining operations in 3 territories. Enough money to buy a small country. And someone wants it. My guardian. My father's business partner. A man named Thomas Kane. The name came out like poison. He was appointed to manage the estate until I turned 25. That's next month. Caleb was starting to understand. But if you die before then, everything goes to him. All of it. My father's will was very clear. She picked up the coffee cup, her hands shaking. Thomas has been stealing from the company for years. I found the evidence 6 months ago. If I lived to take control, I could prosecute him, send him to prison, so he decided I shouldn't live. The carriage accident. He hired men to arrange it. They were supposed to make it look like I drowned. No body to examine too closely, just a tragic accident. She took a sip of coffee. But I jumped. I survived. And now he doesn't know if I'm alive or dead. And if he finds out you're alive, he'll send better killers next time. Men who won't fail. Caleb absorbed this. It explained everything. The expensive dress, the way she moved, the fear in her eyes. She wasn't just some woman on the run. She was an heiress with a target on her back. Why didn't you go to the law? He asked. Because Thomas Kane owns half the judges between here and St. Louis. He has senators in his pocket, lawyers on retainer. She set down the cup. I can't fight him through legal channels. He'll bury me in paperwork until my birthday passes, and then it won't matter anymore. So what's your plan?
I don't have one. I've been making this up as I go. She looked at him. When you found me, I was trying to get to San Francisco. I have a friend there, someone my father trusted. I thought if I could reach him, he could help me. But I got lost in the storm. Nearly died. And then you, she trailed off. Saved you. Yes, and now you're stuck with me. She smiled, but it was sad. I'm sorry, Caleb. I'm sorry I brought all of this into your life.
He thought about everything she'd told him, about the fortune, the killers, the man who wanted her dead. He thought about how easy it would be to walk away, to take her to the nearest town and let her fight her own battles. But he also thought about the bruise on her jaw, about the way she'd looked when those men had been talking in the stable, about the fact that she'd jumped from a moving carriage into a freezing river rather than accept the death someone else had planned for her.
How much time do you have, Tasia?
He asked. Until your birthday. 5 weeks, maybe 6. And if you survive that long, then the estate becomes mine. Thomas loses his control. I can use the money to protect myself, hire my own lawyers, expose what he's done. Big if. I know. Caleb walked to the window and looked out at the snow. The sun was rising, painting the white landscape gold. It was beautiful in the way dangerous things often were. All right, he said. All right, what? You stay here. We keep you hidden. 6 weeks. I can manage that. You do that? Even knowing who I am, what I'm running from? He turned to face her. Especially knowing that. Her eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them back quickly. Why? Because someone needs to. Because running alone gets you killed. He paused. And because I don't like men who think they can take what doesn't belong to them. She crossed the room and stood in front of him, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. Thank you, she said quietly. I know that's not enough, but it's enough. They stood there for a moment, and something passed between them. An understanding, maybe, or the beginning of trust. Then Eliza stepped back and wrapped her arms around herself. So what now? She asked. Now you rest. I'll keep watch. And we wait. For what? For your birthday. For Thomas Kane to give up. For whatever comes next. She nodded slowly. Then she moved to the bunk and sat down, exhaustion finally overwhelming fear. Within minutes, she was asleep. Caleb sat in his chair and watched the sunrise through the window. He told Eliza he could manage 6 weeks of hiding her, but the truth was more complicated. 6 weeks was a long time to keep someone invisible, a long time to avoid making mistakes. But it was also a long time to get to know someone, to figure out who they really were beneath the fear and the lies. He looked at Eliza, sleeping in his bunk, and wondered what the hell he'd just gotten himself into. Outside, the snow began to fall again. The snow fell for 3 days straight, and in that time the world outside the cabin disappeared behind a wall of white. Caleb kept the fire burning and the coffee hot, while Eliza slept off weeks of running and fear. When she finally woke on the second afternoon, she looked almost startled to find herself still alive. How long was I out? She asked, her voice rough. 1.5 days, give or take. She sat up slowly, pushing hair out of her face. I dreamed you'd changed your mind, that you'd left me here and gone for the law. I didn't. I can see that. She looked around the cabin like she was trying to orient herself. What time is it? Past 3. You hungry? Starving. He heated up yesterday's stew, and they ate in silence. Outside, the wind howled and threw snow against the shutters. It was the kind of storm that could bury a man if he wasn't careful, the kind that made the cabin feel both like a sanctuary and a trap. After they ate, Eliza stood and stretched, wincing. I should help. What needs doing? Nothing that can't wait. I'm not going to sit idle for 6 weeks, Caleb. I'll go insane. He understood that. He'd seen men go stir-crazy in winter, trapped by weather with nothing but their own thoughts. Can you cook? Yes. Well, I can follow instructions. My mother made sure I learned the basics before she died, though we had servants who did most of it. Not much use for servants out here. I'm starting to understand that. She moved to the stove and examined his supplies. Flour, salt, dried beans, a sack of cornmeal. This is what you live on? It keeps me alive. That's not the same as living well. She pulled down the flour. Do you have eggs? Chickens don't last long in winter. Hawks get them. Milk? Nearest cow is 15 miles away. She sighed. All right, I'll work with what we have. Over the next hour, she made cornbread that was actually edible and beans that didn't taste like leather. Caleb watched her work, noting the way she moved, efficient, deliberate, like she'd been taught to do things properly or not at all. Every so often, she'd pause and look out the window at the storm, and her face would go distant. What are you thinking about? He asked. How strange this is. A month ago, I was in St. Louis, living in a house with 30 rooms. Now I'm in a cabin I could cross in 10 steps, cooking beans on a wood stove. She stirred the pot. It's not a complaint, just an observation. You miss it, the big house? Parts of it? My father's library? The garden in summer? My own bed? She glanced at him, but not the rest. Not the social calls and dinner parties and pretending to care about people who only wanted proximity to my father's money. Sounds lonely. I don't know. She set down the spoon. My mother died when I was 12. After that, it was just me and my father. He tried, but he was always working, always building something new. And then he died too, and suddenly I was surrounded by people who all wanted something from me. Her voice went flat. Thomas Kane, most of all. He was your father's partner.
For 20 years, my father trusted him completely. When he made his will, he never imagined Thomas would... She stopped. I shouldn't talk about this. Every time I do, I just get angry. Anger's better than fear. Is it? I'm not sure anymore. She went back to stirring. Tell me about you instead. You said you've been out here 10 years. Where were you before?
Caleb had known the question was coming, but he still didn't like it. East. That's not an answer.
It's the one you're getting. She turned to face him. You know everything about me. My real name, who's hunting me, why they want me dead. But you won't tell me anything about yourself. There's nothing to tell. I don't believe that. Doesn't make it less true. They stared at each other. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind screamed. Fine, Eliza said finally. Keep your secrets. But don't expect me to believe you're just some nobody who happened to build a cabin in the middle of nowhere. She went back to cooking, her movement sharp with irritation. Caleb let it drop. She'd figure it out eventually. Everyone did, if they spent enough time around him. He had the kind of face that suggested a past worth forgetting. The storm finally broke on the 4th day. Caleb woke to silence. Not the dead quiet of snowfall, but the bright, ringing silence of clear skies and cold sun. He got up carefully, trying not to wake Eliza, who'd taken to sleeping on a pallet he'd made from blankets near the fire. She stirred anyway. Is it over? She asked. Yeah. She sat up and immediately moved to the window, pushing aside the shutter. Light poured in, almost blinding. The snow outside was pristine, untouched, glittering like broken glass. It's beautiful, she said. It's deadly. All that new snow means the trails are buried. Could be weeks before anyone can move through the high country. That's good for us, though, isn't it? If no one can get through, Thomas's men can't either. Works both ways. We can't get out if we need to. She looked at him. Do you think we'll need to? Hope not, but it pays to think ahead. He spent the morning digging out the lean-to and checking on the gelding, who'd weathered the storm well enough but was getting low on hay. That meant a trip down to the lower pastures where he'd stashed supplies in the fall, a full day's journey in good weather, probably 2 in this snow. When he came back inside, Eliza was reading. She'd found his small collection of books, mostly practical guides on trapping and animal husbandry, plus a battered copy of Shakespeare he'd picked up years ago and never quite finished. The Tempest? She said, holding up the book. Interesting choice. It was cheap. It's also about exile and isolation, about a man living alone on an island, cut off from the world. She smiled slightly. Seems fitting? It's just a book. Nothing is just anything. She set it down. I used to read all the time. My father had thousands of books. I could spend days in that library and never read the same thing twice. What'd you read? Everything. History, philosophy, novels,
French, English, German. My father insisted I learn languages. He said the world was getting smaller and only fools stayed provincial. Sounds like a smart man. He was. Too smart for his own good sometimes. He trusted the wrong people. She paused. He trusted Thomas. Caleb poured coffee and sat across from her. You said you found evidence of the stealing.
Account books, contracts that didn't match the ledgers. Thomas was good at hiding it, but he got careless after my father died. I think he assumed I wouldn't look, that I'd just accept whatever he told me. Her hands tightened around the book. I might have if I hadn't overheard him talking to one of his associates. They were in my father's study, drinking his whiskey, laughing about how easy it had been to divert funds, how I was too stupid to notice. So you started digging.
I spent 3 months going through every document I could find, building a case, and when I had enough evidence, I confronted him. She laughed bitterly. That was my mistake. I should have gone straight to the authorities, but I wanted him to know I'd figured it out. I wanted to see his face. What happened? He smiled, just smiled and told me proof didn't matter, that he had judges and lawyers who'd tie me up in court for years, that by the time anything came of it, I'd be 25 and it would be too late. He'd have drained the accounts and moved the money somewhere I couldn't touch it. She looked up. And then he said if I pushed it, he'd make sure I had an accident, just like my father. Caleb went very still. Your father's death wasn't natural. The doctors said heart failure. But my father was healthy. He rode horses. He was strong. Her voice dropped. I think Thomas poisoned him, slowly, over months. Something that would look like illness. You have proof? No, just suspicion. But it fits. My father started getting sick right after he told Thomas he was thinking of selling the company. Thomas convinced him to wait, to think it over. And while my father thought it over, he got sicker and sicker until... She stopped, pressing her lips together. Caleb let the silence sit. After a moment, Eliza continued. After the funeral, Thomas was so helpful, so concerned. He took over everything, said I shouldn't worry about business matters, that he'd handle it all. And I let him. I was grieving, I was lost, and he seemed like the only stable thing in my life. She shook her head. I was an idiot. You were 19 and your father had just died. That doesn't make you an idiot, doesn't it? I trusted the man who probably murdered him. You didn't know. I should have. There was real pain in her voice, and Caleb recognized it. The pain of looking back and seeing all the ways you'd failed, all the moments you could have changed things if you'd just been smarter or faster or better. He knew that pain intimately. Second-guessing yourself doesn't help, he said. Trust me on that. Speaking from experience? Yeah. She waited, clearly hoping he'd elaborate. When he didn't, she sighed and stood up. I should do something useful. What needs doing around here? You could check the traps. I set some snares before the storm. Show me where. He took her out into the snow, which came up past their knees in places. She wore his spare coat and the 2 big boots, and she looked ridiculous, but she didn't complain. He showed her the trap line he'd set up, a dozen snares arranged in a wide circle around the cabin, positioned near game trails. You check these every day, he explained. Anything caught, you dispatch it quick. Don't let it suffer. Have you caught anything? Not since before the storm, but we will. They checked the line together. Most of the traps were empty, buried under snow, but the second to last one had a rabbit. It was frozen solid, probably had been for days. Eliza stared at it. First time seeing something dead? Caleb asked. No, but first time seeing something I'm going to eat. She reached out hesitantly, then pulled back. You do it? He reset the snare and carried the rabbit back to the cabin. Once inside, he showed her how to skin and clean it, walking her through each step. She watched closely, her face pale but determined. When he offered her the knife to try, she took it. Like this? She asked, making the first cut. Deeper. You're not going to hurt it. She pressed harder and the skin peeled back. This is disgusting. This is dinner. Both things can be true. By the time they finished, she had blood on her hands and a strange look on her face, part revulsion, part satisfaction. I did it, she said, staring at the cleaned meat. You did. In St. Louis, meat came from the butcher, all cleaned and wrapped. I never thought about how it got that way. She washed her hands in the basin. Everything here is so immediate, so real. That's what happens when you strip away the layers. Is that why you came here? To strip away layers? Caleb didn't answer. He took the rabbit and started preparing it for the pot. Eliza watched him work, then finally asked the question he'd been avoiding. You were running from something too, weren't you? His hand stilled. Everyone runs from something. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. She was quiet for a moment, then, my father used to say that isolation was a choice, but loneliness was a consequence. I think he was right. You can choose to be alone, Caleb, but eventually the loneliness catches up. Maybe. Definitely. She moved closer. I've seen your face when you think I'm not looking. You're lonely. You've been lonely for a long time. And what if I am? That's my business.
It is. But we're stuck together now, for 6 weeks at least. So maybe... She hesitated. Maybe we could try not being lonely. At least for a little while. He looked at her then, really looked at her. She was still wearing his too big clothes, still had blood under her fingernails from cleaning the rabbit. Her hair was tied back in a messy braid, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She looked nothing like an heiress. She looked like someone who'd survived something terrible and was trying to figure out how to keep surviving. All right, he said quietly. All right? We try not being lonely. She smiled, and it was the first real smile he'd seen from her. It changed her whole face, made her look younger and less guarded. Good, she said, because I talk a lot when I'm nervous, and I've been nervous for weeks. You're going to hear every thought I've ever had. That's what I'm afraid of. She laughed, and the sound filled the cabin in a way it hadn't been filled in years. Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a routine. Caleb would wake before dawn and check the traps while Eliza got the fire going and started breakfast. They'd eat together, then spend the day on separate tasks, him hunting or chopping wood, her cooking or mending clothes or reading. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire and talk. And Eliza talked. She told him about growing up in St. Louis, about her father's business trips and her mother's garden parties. She told him about learning to play piano and hating every minute of it, about reading books under her covers after bedtime, about the first time she'd seen the Mississippi River and thought it looked like the whole world was moving. She told him about the day her mother died, a fever that came on fast and took her in 3 days, about how her father had shut himself in his study for a week afterward and come out looking 10 years older, about how she'd learned to be quiet, to not need things, to take care of herself because everyone else was too busy grieving. And slowly, piece by piece, Caleb found himself talking too. Not about the things he'd run from. He wasn't ready for that. But about smaller things. About building the cabin, about his first winter alone when he'd nearly frozen to death because he hadn't stored enough wood. About the mountain lion that had circled the cabin for 3 nights. About the spring when the creek flooded and he'd woken up to 6 inches of water inside. You actually stayed, Eliza asked, even after the flood? Where else was I going to go? Anywhere. Town, another settlement. Didn't want to be around people. Why not? He stared at the fire. Because people ask questions. She was quiet for a moment, then, I won't ask. Not if you don't want me to. But you want to know. Of course I want to know. She stopped, searching for words. You're not like anyone I've met before. You live alone in the wilderness. You don't talk about your past, and you saved my life without asking for anything in return. That makes you either a saint or someone running from something worse than what I'm running from. I'm not a saint. I didn't think so. They sat in silence. The fire burned low. Outside, the wind had picked up again, bringing more snow. I killed someone, Caleb said finally. The words came out rough, like they'd been stuck in his throat for years. 10 years ago. That's why I'm here. Eliza didn't react with shock or fear. She just nodded slowly. Was it self-defense? Depends who you ask. I'm asking you. He closed his eyes. The memory was still sharp after all this time, the saloon in Kansas City, the drunk man who wouldn't let it go, the way the fight had escalated until there was a gun in someone's hand. Caleb's hand. He drew first, Caleb said, but I could have walked away, should have walked away. Instead, I stayed and proved I was faster. He opened his eyes. Turned out he was someone important, a judge's son. They wanted to hang me for it. But you ran. I ran, changed my name, headed west,
Kept moving until I found a place where no one would look for me.
Do they still look? Don't know. After 10 years, maybe they've given up. Or maybe there's still a warrant out there with my face on it. He looked at her. So now you know. The man who saved you is wanted for murder. She was quiet for a long time. Then she reached across the space between them and took his hand. Her fingers were warm from holding her coffee cup.
The man who saved me made a mistake when he was younger, she said. The man who saved me has been punishing himself for it ever since. Those are two different things.
Are they?
Yes. Because the man who made that mistake probably would have left me in the snow, but you didn't. You brought me here. You protected me. You gave up your solitude to keep me safe.
She squeezed his hand. That's who you are now. Whatever you were then doesn't change that.
He wanted to believe her, but he'd spent 10 years carrying the weight of that night, and it wasn't something he could just set down because someone said it was okay. You should be afraid of me, he said. Should I? You've had plenty of chances to hurt me. You haven't. That doesn't mean I won't.
Yes, it does. Because I've seen who you are when you don't think anyone's watching. I've seen you check those traps every day, even in the worst weather, because you won't let anything suffer. I've seen you break your own routines to make room for me. I've seen you sit up at night making sure the fire doesn't go out so I'll be warm. She leaned closer. You're a good man, Caleb Rourke. Whatever name you used before, whoever you were, that person isn't here anymore. You don't know that. Yes, I do. They sat there, hands linked, while the fire crackled and the wind howled. And for the first time in 10 years, Caleb let himself believe that maybe she was right, that maybe the past didn't have to define everything that came after. 3 weeks into her stay, a rider appeared on the ridge above the cabin. Caleb spotted him from the trapline, a dark shape against white snow, too far away to identify, but close enough to be a threat. He grabbed Eliza, who'd been helping him, and pulled her behind a stand of trees. Stay down, he whispered. Who is it? Don't know, but anyone coming up here in winter isn't bringing good news. They watched as the rider slowly descended toward the cabin. He was alone, bundled against the cold, riding a sturdy black horse. As he got closer, Caleb could make out more details. Expensive coat, good boots, the kind of gear that spoke to money. One of Thomas's men? Eliza breathed. Maybe, or just someone passing through. But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. Nobody passed through this high country in winter. The rider had come here deliberately. They watched as he reached the cabin and dismounted. He knocked on the door, waited, knocked again. Then he tried the handle. The door was locked. Caleb had started locking it after Eliza arrived, and after a moment the man stepped back and looked around. He's searching, Eliza whispered, looking for signs someone's here. The man circled the cabin, checking the windows, examining the snow for tracks. Caleb had been careful, always approaching from different angles, brushing out prints when he could. But you couldn't hide everything. The rider stopped near the lean-to. He could probably see the gelding inside, hear it moving. He stood there for a long moment, then walked back to his horse and pulled something from his saddlebag. Paper. He tacked it to the cabin door. Then he mounted up and rode back the way he'd come, disappearing over the ridge within minutes. Caleb and Eliza stayed hidden for another 20 minutes, making sure he was really gone. Then they approached the cabin cautiously. The paper was still there, fluttering in the wind. Caleb pulled it down and read it. His blood went cold. What does it say? Eliza asked. He handed it to her. It was a notice, professionally printed. Reward. $5,000 for information leading to the whereabouts of Eliza Harrington, missing since January. Dark hair, brown eyes, approximately 5 feet 4 inches. Last seen near St. Louis. Contact Thomas Kane and Associates with any information. Reward doubled for her safe return. Below the text was a sketch. It looked like Eliza, but not quite. The artist had captured her features but missed something essential. Still, it was close enough that anyone who spent time with her would recognize it. $5,000, Eliza said faintly. That's more than most people make in 5 years. He's serious about finding you. And he's not pretending I'm dead anymore. That means he knows. He knows I survived. Caleb looked at the sketch again. This rider, he was scouting, checking cabins, homesteads, anywhere you might be hiding, which means there are probably others doing the same thing. How many others? With that kind of money? Dozens. Maybe more.
He crumpled the paper. We need to be more careful. No more helping with the traps. You stay inside, away from windows. For how long? Until your birthday. 3 more weeks. She looked at the cabin, at the narrow space where she'd be confined. I'll go crazy. You'll be alive. Is that enough? It has to be. They went inside and Caleb barred the door, something he hadn't done since building the place. Eliza sat at the table, her face pale. He doubled the reward for my safe return, she said. Why would he do that? Makes him look like he cares, like he's desperately searching for his missing ward. But he doesn't want me returned safe. He wants me dead. He wants you dead quietly. If someone brings you back alive, he'll have to arrange another accident. Messier that way. Caleb started building up the fire, needing something to do with his hands. The bounty's smart, gets people looking, but he controls what happens when they find you. So we're trapped. We're cautious. There's a difference. But even as he said it, he felt the walls closing in. 3 more weeks of hiding, of watching the ridge for riders, of waiting for the knock on the door that might mean discovery. 3 more weeks of keeping Eliza safe while the net around them tightened. That night, neither of them slept well. Caleb sat in his chair with his rifle across his knees, listening to every sound outside. Wind, animals, the crack of ice. Eliza lay on her pallet by the fire, staring at the ceiling. Caleb, she said quietly. Yeah? If they find us, if Thomas's men come, what will you do? Keep you safe. Even if it means fighting, killing? He thought about that. About the line he'd drawn 10 years ago when he'd killed a man and run from the consequences. About whether he'd cross that line again. Yes, he said finally. Even then. She was quiet for a moment, then, thank you. Don't thank me yet. We've still got 3 weeks to get through. I know, but whatever happens, her voice caught. I'm glad I'm here with you. I'm glad it was you who found me. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Just listened to her breathing even out as she finally fell asleep and kept watch through the cold, dark hours until dawn. The days after the rider's visit crawled by with agonizing slowness. Eliza stayed inside as promised, pacing the small cabin like a caged animal. Caleb watched her unravel by degrees. The way she'd stop mid-sentence and stare at nothing. The way her hands trembled when she poured coffee. The way she'd wake gasping in the middle of the night from dreams she wouldn't talk about. On the 5th day, she finally broke. I can't do this anymore, she said, her voice tight. I can't just sit here waiting for them to find us. Caleb looked up from cleaning his rifle. You have a better idea? Yes, we leave. We head for San Francisco like I planned. My friend there, he has resources, connections. He can protect me. San Francisco's 1,000 miles away, in winter, with bounty hunters looking for you. Then we go somewhere else. Canada, Mexico, anywhere but here. And how far do you think we'd get? A week? 2? He set down the rifle. The second we move, we leave tracks, trails, evidence. Right now, no one knows you're here. We run, and we make it easy for them. So we just wait? Hope they give up? That's exactly what we do. She laughed, but it was a harsh sound. You're asking me to trust that a man who's already tried to kill me once will just stop looking. That's insane. No, I'm asking you to trust that 3 weeks isn't forever, that you can hold out a little longer. And what if I can't? Her voice rose. What if I'm not as strong as you think I am? What if being trapped in this cabin is worse than taking my chances out there? It's not. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Because out there, you're alone. In here, you're not. The words hung between them. Eliza stared at him, her chest heaving, and something in her expression shifted. The anger drained away, replaced by something rawer. I'm scared, she said quietly. I've been scared for so long I can't remember what it feels like not to be. And being stuck here, waiting, it's making it worse. At least when I was running, I was doing something. Caleb stood and crossed to her. You are doing something. You're surviving. That's harder than running. Is it? Yeah, running's easy. Any coward can run. But standing your ground, waiting out the threat, not letting fear make your decisions, that takes real strength. She looked up at him, and her eyes were wet. I don't feel strong. You are. You've been strong since the day I found you. He hesitated, then added, You jumped out of a moving carriage into a freezing river. Most people would have just accepted what was happening. But you didn't. You fought. And look where it got me. Hiding in a cabin, terrified of every sound. It got you alive. Everything else is details. She wiped at her eyes roughly. You're very practical. Someone has to be. A smile ghosted across her face. I'm sorry for losing my temper, for being difficult. You're not difficult. You're trapped and scared. There's a difference. She moved to the window and looked out at the snow. The sky was gray, threatening another storm. Can I ask you something? Depends what it is. That man you killed, the judge's son. Do you think about him? Caleb hadn't expected that question. Every day? Do you regret it? I regret how it happened. The fight, the pride, the stupidity of it all, but... He paused, searching for the right words. He was going to kill me. I saw it in his eyes, so do I regret saving my own life? No. Even though it cost you everything? Even though... She turned back to face him. Thomas is going to keep coming. Even if we wait out these 3 weeks, even if I turn 25 and inherit everything, he'll find another way. Men like him always do. So what are you saying? I'm saying maybe running isn't the answer. Maybe waiting isn't either. Maybe... She stopped, biting her lip. Maybe what? Maybe I need to fight back. Caleb studied her. There was something different in her eyes now, something harder. You want to go after him. I want to stop hiding. I want to take control of my own life instead of letting him dictate every move I make. She moved away from the window. When I turn 25, I'll have access to everything. Money, lawyers, investigators. I can build a case against him that's ironclad. I can destroy him legally, publicly, make sure everyone knows what he did. That's dangerous. Staying here is dangerous. Running is dangerous. Everything is dangerous. She crossed her arms. At least this way, I'm the one making the choice. You'd have to survive until your birthday first. That's 2.5 weeks. We can manage 2.5 weeks. And then what, you waltz into the nearest bank and withdraw your fortune? Something like that. You're forgetting that Thomas has been managing your estate for 5 years. He probably has every banker, every lawyer, every judge between here and St. Louis in his pocket. Then I'll go somewhere he doesn't have influence. San Francisco, Denver, somewhere his reach doesn't extend. Caleb shook his head. You're underestimating him, and you're underestimating me. She stepped closer. I know I seem helpless, a rich girl who can't even skin a rabbit without getting queasy. But I'm not stupid, Caleb. I've been planning this for months. I know which banks hold which accounts. I know which lawyers my father trusted and which ones were loyal to Thomas. I know where the evidence is hidden, who to contact, what steps to take. Her voice hardened. I've been preparing for war. I just needed to survive long enough to wage it. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something he hadn't noticed before. Beneath the fear and exhaustion was steel, the kind of strength that didn't come from physical power but from sheer stubborn will. All right, he said slowly. Say you're right. Say you can take him down legally. That still means going public, showing your face. And the minute you do that, you're a target again. I know. So you'll need protection, real protection, not just a man in a cabin with a rifle. I'll hire guards, private investigators, whatever it takes. With what money? You don't have access to your accounts yet. She smiled slightly. I have something better. I have you. Caleb blinked. What? You said you'd keep me safe. That was 3 weeks ago, and you've kept your word, so I'm asking you to keep it a little longer. Come with me to San Francisco. Help me get established, get protected. Once I'm safe, once I have my money and my lawyers, you can go back to your cabin and your isolation, and I'll never bother you again. Eliza, I know it's asking a lot. I know you came out here to get away from the world, but I need help. And you're the only person I trust. The words hit him harder than they should have. Trust. When was the last time anyone had trusted him? When was the last time he'd trusted himself? I don't know, he said. That's not a no. It's not a yes either. She reached out and took his hand, the same way she had when he told her about his past. Think about it. We've got 2 weeks. That's enough time to decide. He nodded, and she squeezed his hand before letting go and moving back to the fire. But Caleb stood there for a long time, feeling the weight of what she was asking. Leaving the cabin meant leaving safety. It meant going back to towns and people, and the constant risk of being recognized. It meant putting himself in danger for someone he'd known less than a month. It meant caring about someone again and all the vulnerability that came with it. That night, another storm rolled in. Not as bad as the first one, but mean enough to keep them inside for 2 days. They passed the time playing cards. Eliza taught him a complicated game she'd learned in St. Louis, and talking about everything except what mattered: the weather, books, the peculiar habits of the gelding, who'd taken to nickering every time Eliza came near, clearly preferring her to Caleb. "He likes me better," Eliza said smugly. "He likes the carrots you keep sneaking him."
That's not sneaking. That's strategic friendship building. It's bribery. Same thing. On the second night of the storm, Caleb woke to find Eliza standing at the window, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the snow. The fire had burned low and the cabin was cold. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She didn't turn. "I keep thinking about my father, about what he'd say if he could see me now." "What do you think he'd say?" "Probably that I was being reckless, that I should have gone to the authorities immediately, that I should have been smarter, more careful." She paused. "But maybe he'd also be proud, that I didn't just roll over and accept what Thomas wanted, that I fought." "He'd definitely be proud. You didn't know him." "No, but I know you, and if he was anything like his daughter, he'd want you to keep fighting." She finally looked at him. "Will you come with me to San Francisco?" He'd been expecting the question, but it still caught him off guard. "I haven't decided." "I know, but I need an answer soon, because if you won't come, I need to make other plans." "What kind of plans?" "The kind that don't involve you risking your life for someone you barely know." Caleb got up and moved to stand beside her at the window. Outside, the snow fell thick and fast, erasing everything. "I know you better than you think." "Do you?" "Yeah, I know you're stubborn and smart, and you don't give up even when you probably should. I know you talk when you're nervous, and you get quiet when you're scared. I know you hate feeling helpless, and you'd rather take a risk than sit still and wait." He glanced at her. "And I know you're willing to walk into danger alone, rather than let someone else get hurt for you." She was quiet for a moment, then, "You see a lot." "I pay attention." "That's not the same thing." "Close enough." She turned to face him fully. "I'm going to ask you one more time, and whatever you answer, I'll accept it, and we won't talk about it again. Will you come with me to San Francisco?" Caleb looked at her, at this woman who'd stumbled into his life and turned everything upside down, who'd made him talk about things he'd buried for years, who'd made him remember what it felt like to care about something other than survival. "Yeah," he said. "I'll come." Her face broke into a smile, real and bright and relieved. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We've still got to get there alive." "We will. I know we will." He wished he had her certainty, but he nodded anyway, and they stood together at the window, watching the storm erase the world outside. The 10th day after the rider's visit, everything went wrong. Caleb was outside checking the traps when he heard horses. Multiple horses, moving fast. He dropped the rabbit he'd just retrieved and ran back toward the cabin, his heart slamming against his ribs. He burst through the door to find Eliza already pressed against the wall beside the window, her face white. "How many?" she whispered. "Don't know. At least 3. "What do we do?" "Stay quiet. Stay hidden. If they come to the door, you hide in the root cellar." "And you?" "I'll handle it." The horses got louder. Caleb grabbed his rifle and positioned himself near the door, out of sight from the windows. Eliza moved to the root cellar entrance, a trapdoor hidden under a rug in the corner, and lifted it slowly. The horses stopped outside. Voices, low and male, footsteps crunching in snow. Then a knock, hard and authoritative. "Hello, the cabin." Caleb didn't respond. Eliza had disappeared into the cellar, pulling the door shut above her. He waited, rifle ready. "We know someone's here," the voice continued. "We can see your horse in the lean-to. We just want to talk." Still Caleb said nothing. A pause. Then, "We're looking for a woman, dark hair, about 5'4". There's a reward for information, big reward. If you've seen her, all you have to do is tell us and we'll be on our way." Caleb's finger rested on the trigger. Through the gap in the shutter, he could see 3 men, all armed, all wearing the kind of clothes that said they were professionals. Bounty hunters, probably. Or Thomas's hired men. "Look," the man said, his voice getting harder. "We can do this easy or we can do it hard. Your choice.
but we're not leaving until we search that cabin. You got a warrant? Caleb called out.
A pause, then laughter. This is the frontier, friend. Nobody cares about warrants. I do. You want to search my property? You get a judge to sign paper. Otherwise, you turn around and ride out. That's not how this works. It's how it works on my land. More muttering outside. Caleb couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. They were deciding whether to force the issue. We're coming in, the man finally said. If you're smart, you won't try to stop us.
The door handle rattled. Caleb had barred it from inside, but that wouldn't hold against 3 determined men. He had maybe 30 seconds to make a decision. He could fight. 3 against 1 were bad odds, but he had the advantage of position. He could drop 1, maybe 2 before they got inside. But then what? A shootout in a cabin with Eliza hidden below the floor? Too risky. Or he could open the door. Let them search. Hope they didn't find the root cellar. Didn't notice the women's clothes drying by the fire. Didn't see any of the 100 small signs that someone else was living here. The door shook as someone kicked it. Wood splintered. Caleb made his choice. He set down the rifle, unbarred the door, and pulled it open. 3 men stood on his porch. The one in front was big, barrel-chested, with a scar running from his ear to his jaw. The other 2 were younger, harder, the kind of men who got paid to hurt people. Smart move, Scarface said. Now step aside. Caleb didn't move. Show me the warrant first. You deaf? I said there's no warrant. Then you're not coming in. The big man's eyes narrowed. You protecting someone? I'm protecting my property. There's a difference. Is there? He pushed past Caleb into the cabin, the other 2 following. Caleb's hands clenched, but he didn't reach for the rifle. Not yet. The men spread out, looking around. One checked the bunk, pulled back the blankets. Another opened the cupboard, examined the supplies. Scarface stood in the middle of the room, turning slowly. You live here alone? He asked. Yeah. How long? 10 years, give or take. Seen anyone passing through recently? Woman, maybe? Dark hair? No. You're sure? I'm sure. Scarface walked to the fire and picked up a piece of cloth that had been drying there. One of Eliza's stockings. He held it up. These don't look like they belong to a man. Caleb's heart stopped. They're mine. You wear women's stockings? I wear whatever keeps my feet warm. The other 2 men had stopped searching. They were watching Caleb now, hands drifting toward their guns. Scarface dropped the stocking and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. You're lying. I'm not. Yeah, you are. I can see it in your face. He took a step closer. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me where she is, or we're going to tear this place apart until we find her. And if you try to stop us, well, accidents happen out here in the wilderness. No one around to say different. Caleb looked at the 3 men, calculated the angles, the distances. He could maybe reach the rifle before they drew. Maybe, but probably not. She's not here, he said. Then you won't mind if we look. They started searching in earnest now, pulling up floorboards, checking behind the stove, emptying the cupboards. One of the younger men found the trap door. Hey, boss. Root cellar. Scarface's smile widened. Well now, let's see what's down there. Caleb moved without thinking. He grabbed the rifle and swung it up, but Scarface was faster. He drew and fired in one smooth motion. The bullet caught Caleb in the shoulder, spinning him around. He went down hard, the rifle clattering across the floor. Stupid, Scarface said, standing over him. Real stupid. One of the younger men pulled open the trap door. It's dark. Need a light. Caleb tried to get up, but pain exploded through his shoulder and he fell back. Blood was spreading across his shirt, hot and wet. He could hear someone moving in the cellar, could hear Eliza's sharp intake of breath as light flooded down. Well, well, Scarface said. Guess you were lying after all. They pulled Eliza up through the trap door. She didn't fight, didn't scream, just stood there with her head high and her eyes cold. Miss Harrington, Scarface said, Mr. Kane's been looking for you. I'm sure he has. You're going to come with us now. Peacefully. And if I don't? He gestured at Caleb, still on the floor. Then your friend here bleeds out on his own floor. Your choice. Eliza looked at Caleb. Their eyes met, and he tried to tell her with his expression what he couldn't say out loud. Don't go. Fight. Run. but she just shook her head slightly and turned back to Scarface. "I'll come," she said, "but only if you let him live, get him to a doctor." "We're not errand boys." "Then I don't go. You'll have to shoot me too, and I doubt Mr. Kane would appreciate you killing his meal ticket." Scarface considered this. Then he nodded. "Fine. We'll send someone back for him. But if you cause any trouble, I won't." They tied her hands and led her toward the door. Eliza looked back once at Caleb, and her expression broke his heart. Not fear, not panic, just resignation, like she'd known all along it would end this way. Then they were gone, and Caleb was alone with the pain in his shoulder and the blood spreading across the floor and the terrible knowledge that he'd failed her. He lay there for a long time, listening to the horses fade into the distance. The fire crackled. Wind whistled through the open door. His shoulders screamed with every breath. He'd promised to keep her safe. He'd promised to protect her. And he'd failed. The darkness at the edges of his vision was spreading, threatening to pull him under. But Caleb fought it, because there was one thing he could still do. One last promise he could keep. He could follow them. He could get her back. Or he could die trying. Using his good arm, Caleb dragged himself across the floor to where he kept his medical supplies. A battered tin box with whiskey, needle and thread, and cloth for bandaging. The wound in his shoulder was bad but not fatal. The bullet had gone clean through, missing bone and major arteries. He'd been lucky, sort of. He poured whiskey over the wound and bit down on a leather strap to keep from screaming. The pain was blinding, white hot, but it cleared his head. He packed the hole with cloth, wrapped it tight, and tied it off with his teeth in one hand. Not pretty, but it would hold. By the time he finished, he was covered in sweat and the cabin was spinning. He sat against the wall, breathing hard, trying to think past the pain. They had Eliza. They were taking her back to Thomas Kane. And Kane would kill her, quietly, carefully, in a way that looked like an accident or illness. Maybe he'd wait until after her birthday, until the legal transfer of power was complete. Or maybe he'd just make her sign papers under duress, forge her signature, do whatever it took to secure his control of the fortune. Either way, she was dead unless Caleb did something. He looked at the door, still hanging open, at the blood on his floor, at the empty space where Eliza had been hiding just an hour ago. His cabin, his sanctuary, his isolation felt wrong now. Hollow, like something essential had been ripped out of it. 10 years he'd spent here alone, telling himself he didn't need anyone. 10 years convincing himself that the past didn't matter, that the man he'd been didn't exist anymore. But Eliza had seen through all of it. She'd looked at him and seen not the killer, not the coward who'd run, but someone worth trusting, someone worth believing in. And he'd let her down. Caleb pushed himself to his feet. The world tilted, but he steadied himself against the wall. He had maybe 2 hours before blood loss and shock became a real problem. 2 hours to decide if he was going to die here on his floor or die trying to save her. It wasn't really a choice. He gathered what he could. His rifle, ammunition, dried meat, a canteen. His shoulder screamed with every movement, but he ignored it. Pain was just information. It told you that you were still alive. The gelding was still in the lean-to, spooked but unharmed. Caleb saddled him one-handed, which took twice as long as it should have, and left him gasping. Then he hauled himself into the saddle and turned the horse south, following the tracks the bounty hunters had left. The trail was easy to follow at first. 3 horses moving fast through snow left deep prints. But as the afternoon wore on and the sun started to sink, the tracks got harder to read. The bounty hunters knew their business. They varied their pace, doubled back occasionally, used rocky ground where they could to hide their direction. But Caleb had tracked animals for 10 years. He knew how to read disturbances in snow, how to spot the small signs others missed. And he had something the bounty hunters didn't: desperation. By nightfall, he'd covered maybe 8 miles. His shoulder had stopped bleeding, but the pain had settled into a deep, grinding ache that made his teeth hurt. He needed rest, food, medical attention. He kept riding. Around midnight, he saw lights in the distance. A town, probably Greaves Bend, where this had all started. He pulled the gelding to a stop and sat there, swaying slightly in the saddle, trying to think. If they'd taken Eliza to town, they'd keep her somewhere secure until they could transport her back to St. Louis. The hotel, maybe. Or the jail, if they'd convinced the local sheriff she was a criminal. Either way, Caleb couldn't just ride in and demand her release. He was one man with a bullet wound and no legal standing. They'd arrest him or shoot him, and Eliza would still be trapped. He needed a different approach, something smarter, something Eliza would do. He thought about everything she'd told him about Thomas Kane, about the fortune, the legal maneuvering, the way Kane had spent 5 years positioning himself to take everything, about how the only thing that mattered was Eliza surviving until her 25th birthday. An idea started to form. Dangerous. Maybe stupid. But it might work. Caleb urged the gelding forward, staying off the main road, circling around to approach the town from the east. He found a stand of trees near the edge of town and tied the horse there, then moved on foot toward the buildings. The hotel was dark except for one window on the second floor, the same room Eliza had stayed in that first night. Through the window, Caleb could see movement, guards probably, watching to make sure she didn't escape. He counted 3 men outside the hotel, 1 at the front door, 2 in the alley. Professional setup. Getting to Eliza would mean going through all of them. But Caleb wasn't planning to get to Eliza. Not yet. He moved through the dark streets until he found what he was looking for, the telegraph office. It was closed, but the lock was simple. Caleb broke in, lit a lamp, and sat down at the telegraph key. He'd learned Morse code in another life, before he'd become the man in the cabin. The knowledge came back slowly, his fingers remembering the rhythm even as his mind struggled with the pain and blood loss. He composed the message carefully. To Thomas Kane, St. Louis, stop Eliza Harrington in custody. Greaves Bend. Stop requesting instructions. Stop reward. Claimed. Stop. He sent it, then sat back and waited. The response came 20 minutes later. Secure subject. Stop. Transport. Immediately. Stop. Payment on delivery. Stop. Kane. Caleb read the message twice, then destroyed both telegrams. He left the office as quietly as he'd entered and made his way back toward the hotel. The guard at the front door was young, bored, stamping his feet against the cold. Caleb approached from the shadows. You one of Kane's men? Caleb asked. The guard spun, hand going to his gun. Who's asking? Name's Rourke. I'm the one who was hiding her. Got a message from Kane. Let's see it. It was verbal. Telegraph operator passed it along. Caleb moved closer, keeping his wounded shoulder turned away. Said there's been a change of plans. You're supposed to bring her to the train station. There's a private car waiting. Nobody told me about that. Nobody tells you anything. That's why Kane sent me, to make sure it gets done right. The guard hesitated. I need to check with Scarface. You do that. But Kane's not going to be happy if he finds out you delayed his orders because you needed permission to follow them. That landed. The guard glanced at the hotel door, clearly weighing his options. Where's this train car? Station, West End. But we need to move fast. It leaves in an hour. An hour? That's not much time. That's the point. Kane wants her out of here before anyone asks questions. Caleb lowered his voice. You know how much she's worth? $5,000. That's more than you'll make in 10 years. You really want to risk losing that because you were too slow? The guard's expression changed. Greed won out over caution, like it usually did. All right, let me get the others. He went inside. Caleb waited, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. His shoulder throbbed. His vision was starting to blur at the edges. He needed to end this soon or he was going to collapse. The guard came back with Scarface and the other 2 men. And Eliza. She looked worse than when they'd taken her. Her face was pale, her hands still bound. But her eyes were sharp, alert. When she saw Caleb, something flickered across her face. Surprise. Then understanding. She didn't say anything. This him? Scarface asked, looking Caleb up and down. The one from the cabin? That's what he says. Thought we left you bleeding out. You did, Caleb said. Turns out I'm hard to kill. Scarface smiled that ugly smile. We can fix that. Soon as we deliver her, you're a loose end that needs tying up. Fine with me, long as I get my share of the reward first. Your share? Scarface laughed. You're not getting anything except a bullet. Is that right? Because Kane's message said everyone involved gets paid. You want to explain to him why you decided to cut me out? That made Scarface pause. He looked at Eliza, then back at Caleb. You're lying. Am I? Send a telegram. Ask him yourself. But do it fast, because that train leaves in... Caleb pulled out a pocket watch. 47 minutes. Scarface's jaw tightened. He was trying to calculate the odds, trying to figure out if Caleb was telling the truth. But the mention of Kane's name, the specific timeline, the confidence, it all added up to something believable. Fine, Scarface said finally, but any tricks and I'll shoot you both. They moved as a group toward the train station, Scarface in front, Eliza in the middle with her hands bound, the two younger guards flanking her, and Caleb bringing up the rear. His shoulder was bleeding again. He could feel warmth spreading down his arm. The station was quiet, just one bored attendant at the ticket window. The platform was empty except for a freight train sitting on the far track. "Where's the private car?" Scarface demanded. Caleb pointed at the freight train. "That one. Last car. That's not a private car, that's cargo." "That's the point. Kane doesn't want anyone knowing he's moving her, so it's disguised as freight." Caleb kept his voice steady, authoritative. "You want to stand here arguing or you want to get paid?" Scarface hesitated, then nodded to his men. They started walking toward the train. Caleb's hand moved to his knife. He'd have one chance, maybe two if he was lucky. 3 men plus Eliza. He needed to take down Scarface first, then the others before they could shoot. The math was bad, but it was the only math he had. They reached the last freight car. Scarface pulled open the door and looked inside. It was empty except for straw and shadows. "There's nothing here," he said, turning. Caleb moved. He threw the knife and it caught Scarface in the throat. The big man went down, choking. The two younger guards spun, reaching for their guns, but Caleb was already moving. He tackled the nearest one and they went down hard. The gun went off, the bullet sparking off metal somewhere above them. The second guard had his gun out, aiming at Caleb. But then Eliza kicked him. Her hands were still bound, but her feet weren't, and she caught him in the knee hard enough to drop him. The gun clattered across the platform. Caleb punched the man he was grappling with until he stopped moving, then grabbed the loose gun and aimed it at the second guard, who was trying to get up. "Don't," Caleb said. The guard froze. "Don't," Caleb bowed. "Smart," Caleb said. He was breathing hard, his vision swimming. "Eliza, get his knife. Cut yourself loose." She did, her hands shaking but her movements quick. Once free, she picked up the second guard's gun and held it on him while Caleb got to his feet. "You came," she said softly. "Said I would. You're bleeding." "I know." "Caleb, we need to move." Someone heard that gunshot. They tied up the surviving guards and left them in the freight car, then headed for the edge of town where Caleb had left the gelding. He was moving on instinct now, his body running on fumes. Eliza kept close, supporting him when he stumbled. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Away from here." "That's not a plan." "It's the only one I've got." They reached the trees and Caleb nearly fell trying to mount the horse. Eliza climbed up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist, careful of his wounded shoulder. "I can ride," she said. "Let me take the reins." He handed them over and slumped forward. The last thing he remembered was the horse moving beneath him and Eliza's voice saying his name over and over like a prayer. He woke to daylight and pain. Someone was pressing something hot against his shoulder, and he tried to pull away, but hands held him down. "Stop fighting," Eliza's voice said. "I'm trying to help." Caleb forced his eyes open. They were in a barn, not his, somewhere else. Eliza knelt beside him with a needle and thread, her face set in concentration. "What are you doing?" he managed. "Stitching. You tore the wound open during the fight." She didn't look up. "Hold still." He held still. The pain was immense, but he bit down on it, watching her work. Her hands were steady, her stitches neat, like everything else she did. "Where are we?" he asked. "Abandoned homestead. About 10 miles north of Greaves Bend. I found it after you passed out." "How long was I out?" "Most of the night. It's morning now." She finished the last stitch and tied it off, then sat back. "That should hold. But you need rest. Real rest. In a real bed with a real doctor." "Can't." "Yes, you can. Caleb, you saved my life. Again. You rode 8 miles with a bullet wound, broke into a telegraph office, lied to armed men, and fought 3 people while bleeding out. You've done enough." "Not yet." "What else is there?" He tried to sit up. The world spun, but he fought through it. "Thomas Kane, we need to finish this." "How? We're in the middle of nowhere. You can barely stand, and half the territory is looking for me." "Your birthday? When is it?" 3 days? Then we have 3 days to get you somewhere safe, somewhere you can claim your inheritance and take him down. She shook her head. Even if we make it to a bank, even if I can access the accounts, Thomas will he'll do what he always does. He'll lie, manipulate, use the system against you. Caleb looked at her. Unless you beat him at his own game. I don't understand. You said he's been stealing for years, that you have evidence. I did have evidence. It's in St. Louis, in my father's study, hidden. So we don't need to go to San Francisco. We need to go to St. Louis. That's insane. That's walking straight into his hands. No, it's doing what he doesn't expect. He thinks you're running west toward safety. He's got men watching the trains, the roads, anything heading to California. But nobody's watching the roads east, back toward where you came from. Eliza stared at him. You want to go back to St. Louis? I want to get the evidence. Take it public. Force his hand before your birthday, not after. She stopped. That might actually work. It will work. Because he's arrogant. He thinks he's already won. That's his weakness. She was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then, we'd need to move fast. 3 days to get to St. Louis, get the evidence, and get it to someone who matters. A judge, a newspaper, someone Thomas hasn't bought. You know anyone like that? Maybe. My father had a friend, a federal prosecutor. If anyone's clean, it's him. Then that's where we go. She looked at him, really looked at him. You can barely sit up. You want to ride 300 miles? I've done harder things. Have you? He met her gaze. I left you once. When those men took you from the cabin, I'm not leaving you again. Something shifted in her expression. She reached out and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his rough skin. You didn't leave me. You came after me. You saved me. Almost got you killed. No, you got me free. She leaned closer. And I'm not losing you now. So we're going to rest here for a few hours. You're going to eat, drink water, and get your strength back. And then we'll ride to St. Louis together. Eliza Tit, that's not a request. He wanted to argue, but he was too tired. And she was right. He needed rest or he'd fall off the horse halfway there. So he nodded and let her help him lie back down. She brought him water and the dried meat from his saddlebag. While he ate, she tended to the gelding, who'd held up better than either of them. When she came back, she sat beside him and took his hand. Tell me about the man you killed, she said quietly. Caleb looked at her. Why? Because you told me about it, but you didn't tell me all of it, and I want to know. He was quiet for a long time, then. His name was Richard Stanton. He was 23, drunk, angry. He said something about a woman I knew, something crude, and I told him to take it back. He pulled a gun. So did I. I was faster. And he died in the street while his friends watched. His father was Judge Stanton, one of the most powerful men in Kansas City. He called it murder. Said I'd provoked his son, that I'd wanted to kill him. Caleb's voice went flat. Maybe he was right. Maybe I did want it. I was angry, stupid, young. I thought being fast with a gun made me somebody. But you ran instead of facing trial. I ran because the trial was fixed. The judge had already decided I was guilty. My lawyer told me I had 2 choices, hang or disappear, so I disappeared. Do you regret it? Running? Every day. But not because I should have faced the rope, because running meant admitting I was a coward, meant spending 10 years alone, hiding from who I used to be. He looked at her. You were right, about the loneliness. It catches up. She squeezed his hand. You're not a coward. A coward wouldn't have come after me, wouldn't have fought 3 armed men to get me back. Maybe I'm just better at running toward things than away from them. Maybe that's what courage is, not the absence of fear, just choosing what you're afraid of. He thought about that, about how he'd spent 10 years afraid of being caught, of facing his past, of letting anyone close enough to matter, and how none of that fear had prepared him for the terror of watching Eliza being taken, of thinking he might never see her again. I'm afraid right now, he admitted. Of what? Of failing you, of getting you killed, of... He stopped. Of what? Of losing you after I just found you. The words hung between them. Eliza's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. You're not going to lose me. We're going to ride to St. Louis, get the evidence, destroy Thomas Kane, and then what? I don't know, but we'll figure it out together. She leaned down and kissed him. It was soft, careful, mindful of his injuries, but it was real. And when she pulled back, Caleb felt something shift inside him, something that had been locked tight for 10 years finally opening. Rest, she said. We ride in 2 hours. They rode hard for 3 days, stopping only when the horses needed it. Caleb's shoulder was agony, but he pushed through it, driven by the knowledge that every hour brought them closer to Eliza's birthday and closer to losing everything. They traveled at night when they could, staying off main roads, avoiding towns. Eliza had some money she'd hidden in her boot. Not much, but enough for food and grain for the horses. They slept in barns, abandoned cabins, anywhere that offered shelter. On the morning of the third day, they reached the outskirts of St. Louis. The city was bigger than Caleb remembered, dirtier, louder. After months in the wilderness, it felt suffocating. But Eliza straightened in the saddle as they approached, her face set with determination. My father's house is on the north side, she said. Big place, 3 stories. Thomas will probably be there. How many servants? Used to be a dozen. But Thomas dismissed most of them after my father died. Said it was to save money. She laughed bitterly. More likely, he didn't want witnesses. So we wait until he leaves, then go in. Or we don't wait at all. Caleb looked at her. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Thomas expects me to sneak around, to hide, to be afraid. Her voice hardened. I'm done being afraid. We go in through the front door, we take what's ours. And if he tries to stop us, we stop him. She nodded. We stop him. They left the horse at a stable and walked through the city streets. Eliza still wore Caleb's borrowed clothes, and she'd pulled her hair back under a hat, but people stared anyway. A woman in men's clothing was unusual enough to draw attention. Maybe you should wait outside, Caleb said. Not a chance. If he sees you, he's going to see me anyway. Might as well be on my terms. The Harrington house was exactly as she'd described. 3 stories of brick and grandeur, with a wrought iron fence and manicured gardens. Even in winter, it looked impressive. The kind of place that said money and power. The kind of place that could swallow a person whole. Eliza walked up to the front door and knocked. After a moment, a servant answered, a middle-aged woman with suspicious eyes. Can I help you? Tell Mr. Kane that Eliza Harrington is here to see him, Eliza said. The woman's eyes went wide. Miss Harrington? But you thought I was dead. I know. I'm not. Now get Thomas. The woman hurried inside. Eliza and Caleb waited. His hand rested on the knife at his belt, hidden under his coat. Footsteps. Heavy, measured. Then a man appeared in the doorway. Thomas Kane was in his 50s, tall and well-dressed, with silver hair and the kind of face that projected authority and trustworthiness. But his eyes, when they landed on Eliza, went cold and calculating. My dear girl, he said, we've been so worried about you. I'm sure you have, Eliza said. Please, come in. You must be exhausted. And your friend? Stays with me. Thomas's smile didn't waver. Of course, whatever you need. They followed him inside. The house was as grand as its exterior. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork on every wall. The kind of wealth that most people couldn't imagine. The kind of wealth worth killing for. Thomas led them to a study lined with books and dark wood furniture. He gestured to chairs. Sit. I'll have tea brought. We don't want tea, Eliza said. I want the truth. The truth about what? About why you tried to have me killed. The room went very quiet. Thomas's smile faded. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. The carriage, the river, the men you hired to make sure I drowned. Eliza stepped closer. You wanted me dead before my 25th birthday so you could keep control of everything my father built. That's absurd. Is it? Because I have evidence. Account books showing where you've been hiding the money you stole. Contracts that don't match the ledgers. Letters between you and your associates discussing how to handle me. Her voice shook, but she didn't back down. I know everything, Thomas. And tomorrow, when I turn 25, I'm going to take it all public. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he moved to a cabinet and poured himself a drink. You always were clever, like your father, too clever for your own good. So you admit it. I admit nothing, But let's say hypothetically that I did try to have you killed. Let's say I've been stealing from your father's company for years. What exactly do you plan to do about it? I told you, I'm going public. I'm going to the federal prosecutor with everything I have. By this time tomorrow, you'll be in jail. Thomas laughed. It was an ugly sound. Oh, my dear girl, you really think it's that simple? You think you can waltz in here with some documents and destroy me? I don't think. I know. Then you're stupider than I thought. He drank, his eyes never leaving her face. I own the prosecutor. I own the judges. I own everyone who matters in this city. Your evidence? It'll disappear before anyone sees it. And you, he smiled, you'll have another unfortunate accident. Maybe a fall down the stairs. Maybe pneumonia. Something quiet. You won't get away with it. I already have. The moment your father died, I won. Everything else is just details. Caleb had heard enough. He stepped forward. She's not alone this time. Thomas looked at him properly for the first time. And you are? Someone who doesn't like men who hurt women. How noble! Thomas set down his drink. But ultimately pointless. You're one man. I have dozens, and all of them are better armed and better paid than you'll ever be. As if on cue, men appeared in the doorway. 3 of them, all carrying guns. Not Scarface and his crew. Those men were probably still tied up in that freight car. But others just like them, professionals. You see, Thomas said, this was over before it started. But Eliza was smiling. It was small, dangerous. You're right, it is over, just not the way you think. She pulled a piece of paper from her pocket and held it up. This is a letter, written to federal prosecutor James Mitchell. It details everything you've done, every theft, every falsified document, every crime, and it's not the only copy. Thomas's expression flickered. What are you talking about? I sent copies, 6 of them, to different newspapers, different officials, different people you don't own. They're all instructed to open them tomorrow, on my 25th birthday, unless I personally tell them not to. She stepped closer. So here's how this works. You're going to let us leave. You're going to transfer control of my inheritance when I turn 25 tomorrow. And you're going to disappear. Leave the country, change your name. I don't care. But if you ever come near me again, if anything happens to me or to Caleb, those letters get opened, and your life is over. You're bluffing. Am I? You want to test that theory? The silence stretched. Thomas looked at Eliza, at Caleb, at his men in the doorway. He was calculating, trying to find an angle, a way to win, but there wasn't one. Eliza had beaten him with the one thing he couldn't buy or threaten or kill, foresight. You little... Thomas's face twisted with rage. He lunged toward Eliza, but Caleb was faster. He grabbed Thomas and slammed him against the wall, his knife at the man's throat. Try it, Caleb said softly. Please. Thomas froze. The men in the doorway shifted but didn't move in. They were hired help. And hired help didn't take bullets for someone who wasn't paying them anymore. The evidence, Eliza said to Thomas. Where is it? Go to hell. Caleb pressed the knife harder. A thin line of blood appeared. Answer her. Father's study, Thomas gasped. Behind the bookshelf, there's a safe. Eliza moved to the bookshelf and started pulling books. After a moment, she found the mechanism. A section of shelving swung open, revealing a small safe. She worked the combination, her father's birthday, and it clicked open. Inside were ledgers, letters, contracts, everything she'd told Caleb about and more. She gathered it all, stuffing it into a satchel she found in the corner. Got it, she said. Caleb released Thomas, who staggered back, clutching his throat. You'll regret this. I don't think so, Eliza said. I think I'm going to sleep better than I have in years, knowing you can't hurt me anymore, knowing you're going to spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. She turned and walked out. Caleb followed, keeping his eyes on Thomas and the hired men until they were out the door. They didn't stop walking until they'd reached the stables and reclaimed the gelding. Only then did Eliza sag against the wall, shaking. I can't believe that worked, she said. You had a plan the whole time. I had a hope. That's not the same thing. Close enough. Caleb checked the street. We need to get those documents somewhere safe. To this prosecutor you mentioned. Mitchell. His office is downtown. She looked at him. Will you come with me? Always. They rode through the city to the federal building, an imposing structure of stone and authority. Eliza dismounted and walked inside like she owned the place. Caleb followed, one hand on his knife, watching for threats. The prosecutor's secretary tried to stop them, but Eliza pushed past. "Tell Judge Mitchell that Jonathan Harrington's daughter needs to see him. Now." The secretary scurried off. A moment later, an older man appeared, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, with the look of someone who'd seen it all and believed none of it. "Miss Harrington," he said, "I heard rumors you'd died." Rumors were wrong. She held out the satchel. "This is evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and attempted murder, all committed by Thomas Kane. My father trusted you. I'm hoping I can do the same." Mitchell took the satchel and opened it. His eyebrows rose as he paged through the contents. "This is substantial. It's everything. Enough to put him away for 20 years if your courts work the way they're supposed to." "They do. Sometimes." He looked at her. "You understand what you're doing? Once I file this, there's no going back. Kane will fight. He'll drag your name through the mud, claim your line, maybe even come after you again. Let him try. I'm not running anymore." Mitchell smiled slightly. "Your father would be proud." "I hope so." They left the documents with Mitchell and walked back out into the afternoon sun. Eliza looked lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. "It's done," she said. "Not yet. You still need to make it to your birthday." "That's tomorrow. Less than 12 hours. She turned to face him. "Where will you go after?" The question hung between them. Caleb had been so focused on getting her here, keeping her safe, that he hadn't thought about after. About what happened when she didn't need protecting anymore. "I don't know," he said honestly. "You could stay in St. Louis. With me." "You don't want that." "Yes, I do." She stepped closer. "You said you were tired of being lonely. So am I. We could figure out what comes next together. I'm a wanted man, Eliza. Eventually someone's going to recognize me. Then we'll deal with it, get you a lawyer, file an appeal, show them it was self-defense." She took his hand. "Or we leave. Go somewhere new, start over. I'll have money, more than we could spend in 10 lifetimes. We could go anywhere, be anyone." "You'd give up your fortune? Everything you fought for?" "In a heartbeat, if it meant keeping you." Caleb looked at her. This woman who'd walked into his life broken and afraid and had somehow become the strongest person he knew, who'd faced down a killer and won, who'd offered him not just survival, but a future. "I don't deserve you," he said. "That's not your choice. It's mine. And I choose you." She kissed him, right there in the street with people walking past and the sun shining down. And for the first time in 10 years, Caleb let himself believe that maybe the past didn't have to define everything, that maybe he could be more than the man who'd run, that maybe he could be the man who stayed. They spent the night in a hotel, a real one, with clean sheets and hot water. Eliza's birthday arrived at midnight, and they celebrated with cheap wine and laughter. When morning came, she went to the bank and claimed her inheritance. The bankers were skeptical at first, but she had documents, signatures, her father's seal. Within 2 hours, she had access to everything. "It's done," she said when she came out. "It's all mine." "How does it feel?" "Strange. Heavy. Like I'm carrying my father's dreams." She looked at him, but also free. "Because now I get to decide what happens next." They learned later that Thomas Kane had fled the city that same morning. Some said he'd gone to Europe. Others claimed he'd headed west, toward territories where the law was thin. Either way, he was gone, and the authorities were happy to let him run. Prosecuting a man in absentia was simpler than a messy trial. Mitchell filed charges anyway. The newspapers ran the story for weeks. The Harrington fortune became the subject of Senate hearings, legal reforms, public outcry. But through it all, Eliza stayed quiet. She'd said what needed saying in those documents. The rest was just noise. A year later, they stood in a different cabin, this one in Montana, with glass windows and a real floor and enough space to breathe. Eliza had bought the land under a different name. Caleb had built the structure with his own hands, working through summer and fall until it was finished. They'd left St. Louis 6 months after her birthday, once the legal matters were settled and the fortune was secured. Eliza had donated half of it to charitable trusts, kept enough for them to live comfortably, and invested the rest in businesses run by people her father had trusted. She'd kept her promise about the prosecutors and the lawyers. Caleb's case had been reopened, New evidence presented, witnesses who'd been paid off by Judge Stanton brought forward. The charges were dropped. Caleb Rourke was no longer a wanted man, but he wasn't the same man either. 10 years alone had changed him, and 6 months with Eliza had changed him more. "You ever miss it?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Your old cabin, the isolation." "Sometimes," he admitted, "but not enough to go back." "Why not?" "Because I learned something. Isolation isn't peace, it's just absence. And absence doesn't heal anything, it just makes the hurt quieter." He looked at her. "You taught me that." "Did I?" "Yeah, you showed me that being alone is a choice, but so is letting people in. And sometimes the second choice is harder, but it's the one worth making." She smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. "I learned something too." "What's that?" "That running doesn't solve anything. That the things you're afraid of, they follow you wherever you go. The only way to be free is to face them, to fight back, to choose a different ending than the one someone else wrote for you." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the smell of pine and snow. "You think Thomas will ever come back?" Eliza asked. "Maybe, but if he does, we'll deal with it. Together." Together. She turned and kissed him, and in that moment Caleb understood something fundamental. That love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about choosing someone every day, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. It was about building something real in a world that wanted to tear everything apart. It was about finding someone in the snow, half frozen and afraid, and deciding that their life mattered more than your safety. And then discovering that in saving them, you'd somehow saved yourself. Years later, when people asked Caleb about his life, he'd tell them the truth, that he'd made mistakes, that he'd run from his past until it caught up with him, that he'd spent a decade alone, thinking that was strength, before learning that real strength was letting someone see you broken and trusting them not to look away. And he'd tell them about Eliza, about how she'd stumbled into his wilderness and refused to be defined by fear, about how she'd fought back against a man who thought he could own her future, about how she'd taught him that the opposite of running wasn't standing still. It was choosing what you ran toward. Some nights, when the wind howled and the snow fell heavy, Caleb would remember that first day, the red dress and white snow, the decision to stop, to look, to care. And he'd realize that every choice after that, every risk, every fight, every moment of doubt, had led here, to this cabin, this life, this woman beside him, to freedom earned not through isolation but through connection, to wealth measured not in gold but in trust, to a future neither of them could have imagined but both had chosen. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. Not the fortune Eliza had inherited or the name Caleb had reclaimed. Not the villain they'd defeated or the danger they'd survived, but the simple, revolutionary act of choosing each other, every day, in every way that counted. They'd started as strangers in a snowstorm. They'd become survivors, partners, fighters. And eventually, they'd become something neither had expected but both desperately needed, home. The snow fell outside their cabin, just like it had that first day. But inside, the fire burned warm, and for the first time in longer than either could remember, they weren't running from anything. They were exactly where they wanted to be.